Our pea grow along is going to be starting mid-February, and then for our dwarf varieties we'll be doing a second sowing in July. We have a few different varieties of peas to consider and that we can choose to grow. First of all, we have our podding pea varieties that come both in a dwarf and a full height plant. Then we have our Monge 2, which is the pea pods that are edible, but the peas themselves are usually not formed. And then we have our Monge 2, where we eat the pods and we eat the formed peas inside as well. And then we also have our drying peas that are used in the same way as our dried beans to be rehydrated and used over the winter months. We will be looking for this grow along at eating fresh types rather than the drying type. For this grow along, the varieties that I'm going to be using is a dwarf pea called Kelvin Wonder, and then a tall pea, which is Sugar Magnolia, which is a sugar snap variety. Peas come in dwarf, semi-dwarf and tall. We want to make sure we know which ones we have so we can offer the correct supports. Usually with our dwarf and semi-dwarf varieties, then just some sticks popped in the soil alongside them is plenty to hold them up, or some strings between some battens. But for our tall varieties, we're looking at a 6 to 8 foot wigwam or support in order to hold them in place. Our dwarf varieties usually come to flower and therefore pod sooner than our tall varieties, and we want to succession sow these in order to make sure that we have plenty of opportunities throughout the year to have young plants that are going to be productive. And then for our tall varieties, they take that little bit longer to mature, and therefore they will mature to peas that little bit later as well. But both of the varieties often will give you a shorter season than, say, beans, which a climbing variety of will give us a season throughout, usually because they will struggle with things like powdered mildew and will just not be healthy as the plant gets older. We're going to be looking at multi-sowing our seeds, and we'll be looking at around 3 seeds in each cell of a cell this size, and around 2 seeds in a cell around this sort of size. So it will depend what you've got of what we're going to be putting in, but they do like to be multi-sown and then planted out in that clump. They also grow quite quickly, and we'll be planting them out before our last frost dates and giving them a bit of a fleece just to protect them. The reason we want to be getting these going sooner rather than waiting a little bit longer is because there's certain pests that are going to cause more issues as the weather warms up. So we want to get them through the flowering stage before we have issues with our pea moths, which can give little maggots and little caterpillars inside each of the pea and just ruin a lot of the crop. And then also by doing the dwarf ones a little bit later, we're going to do that again later on in the season. Pea moth is also a problem with peas. However, these nibble around the edges of the leaves, and as long as our plants are mature enough, then we should find that they will survive an attack of this and continue to produce us plenty of peas. And then powdery mildew is something that is usually going to affect later sown plants or those older plants of our climbing varieties. You can sow peas directly in the ground rather than into cells, and if that's something you want to do, then you can do that as well. However, I'll be sowing them into trays because our local vermins are definitely very keen on them, and that is something that you're likely to find. Traditionally, they would have soaked the seeds in paraffin and then put them into the ground, and then the mice and things would have left them alone. But we'll be starting them inside because that seems a little bit nicer to me than soaking them in paraffin. Another way that a lot of people do sow peas is into a gutter and then slide those peas out and into position when you're ready to do so. I don't have any guttering, so that's not something we're going to do within this grow along, but if you do have some hanging around, then that might be a good thing to have a go at as well. Spacings for these will be anywhere between 15 and 30 centimetres depending on the variety and also how you have your support set up, and we will, as I said, be planting them out in the clumps rather than individually. So if you have got them individually, then we would be putting them in a little bit closer as well. Positioning your peas in full sun is definitely the best place for them if you can do that. For our earlier varieties that we're going to sow, particularly of the dwarf varieties, they will do fantastic with a second planting following them. So something like leeks will be great to follow once these have finished their life cycle as well.